If you want to make your experience in the garden more pleasurable and be more productive and effective while you're in the garden, and most of all, if you hate pulling weeds, then this episode is really for you. Hey everybody, Alan Schaefer at Custom Garden Solutions. In today's exciting episode, we're going to be talking to you about weed fabric. We talk a lot about different tarps and fabrics that we use in our gardens and in our customers' gardens. Weed fabric's a little bit different than silage tarps in that weed fabric actually allows the water and the air to permeate or flow through the fabric, but it keeps the sunlight out. And the main purpose of this is that it reduces your weed pressure, so you're not pulling weeds. So it's been my experience using weed fabrics. I've had to do absolutely zero pulling of weeds. It reduced the amount of time I'm out in the garden pulling weeds so much. I'm in love with weed fabrics. So let's give you a shot of what weed fabric looks like in my garden. All right, so this is weed cloth that you see in front of me, and you see a bunch of peppers that I still need to get planted from yesterday. But in an episode we did on transplanting peppers, I showed you how I dug the hole and put the peppers through the weed cloth, all right? So basically, it's a very light fabric, and as I said, it's permeable, so it allows water and air through, but not sunlight. And what you do is you cut holes out that, for peppers, about 4 inches in diameter is pretty good. So it's offset holes. So they're not straight across from each other, but they're almost like a zigzag pattern. It is a zigzag pattern. And what that allows is when the plants grow, it allows them to have a little bit larger diameter. So you just get a little bit better plant spacing. So you basically, where the holes have been cut, you dig with a trowel, you put your transplant in, and then you cover it back up. They're held in by these little landscape stakes. And I'll talk a little bit about those in a moment. So this is basically it. In the areas where I have landscape fabric, I don't have to weed. I've also noticed that the plants grow a little bit better because it seems to hold in the moisture a little bit better. So that's just an added benefit, but the main purpose is to keep the weed pressure down. All right, so let's check out the weed fabric in action. So this weed fabric's been used for peppers for the last, I believe, the last 2 summers. So this is the 3rd year that this has been in operation, and it's still in really good shape. So I use it in 3-foot wide widths, and I get a package that's in, I think, a 300-foot roll. And I'll put a description down below for this so you can find this stuff. But all my peppers go in here. But this year I had an area of the garden where it was getting quite weedy, and I was going to put some tomato plants in. So I used it there. Let me show you that right now. All right. So here's where I've got the couple tomato plants underneath the weed fabric. And this is an 8-foot length. All right, so it's just a kind of an odd corner of my garden. And the weed fabric comes in 3-foot widths. And I've got row bags in the corner, but these are also staked down. I wanted you to also notice, see the green line? Those green lines actually are very useful. They're 1 foot in from each side. And they really come in handy when you're determining where you're going to put the holes in so that you can get your spacing right. So that's just something that you want to make sure you get when you get weed fabric. Get those green lines that are foot in on each side. Now it's time to introduce you to weed fabric. All right, so this weed fabric came in a 3-foot wide by 300-foot roll. And I've used quite a bit of it already. It's made out of polypropylene. Dun, 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 dun. Big word of the day, polypropylene. which is a woven fabric, and it's very permeable. Maybe permeable is up for a word of the day, but it's very permeable, and it allows for water and air to transfer through it, but not sunlight. That being the case, it keeps down weed pressure. As I mentioned earlier, I haven't had to pick any weeds underneath the weed fabric since I've been using it for the last couple of years. So it's awesome stuff. It's also got good UV stabilization, which means the sunlight doesn't affect it that much. As I mentioned, I've used mine for several years in the garden and I haven't had any problems with it. And it doesn't show any sign of wear or tear. I'll probably be able to use it several more years. I mentioned that the weed fabric is made out of a woven or a mesh material, and you don't want to cut the lengths or the holes for your plants using scissors or box cutters or a knife. If you do so, it's going to fray the material. It's going to kind of frazzle it. And those will tear apart, and over time you'll get rips and things. You actually want to cauterize, or you want to use heat to cut the edges. And I've developed a tool just for that process. Let me show you what that is. So this is what I use to cauterize or to cut or to seal the weed fabric so it doesn't fray or frazzle or create problems down the road. This is a MagTorch MT450. I'll put a link down up below for you, and you can pick this up at Amazon. But here's the end where you connect the propane. This is the starter. You've got a little copper tip on the end. I'm going to take the copper tip off. Comes with a little screw. I've already unscrewed it. And this is where you put on the propane. And this is kind of like your camp oven propane tank. Go ahead and I'll put this up for you. This is Coleman. Doesn't have to be Coleman, just has to have the same size connector on top. And what you do is you turn it on here. This controls not only the on-off, but how much propane you're letting through. Maybe I do it this way. Maybe you can hear this. Right here, there's, see that? There you go. If you listen, you can hear the propane. And then you hit the little starter. And you've got fire. All right, so I'm going to turn that off. And while it's in this form, I'm going to show you how I cut my lengths. So it comes in 3 foot by 300. I'm just going to cut a quick 1 foot length so I can show you how it works. Let's get to it. All right, so what you want to do is I'm cutting the length. So 3 foot wide here, right? Because let's say I need a 10-foot roll. So I'll measure where 10 feet is. And I use 2 pieces of wood. And I just start the tank, the propane. Hit the starter. And you just want to run it in between the 2 pieces of wood. And it cauterizes, or it seals, and turn it off, the weed fabric. Now be careful, because you just cauterize this, it's hot. So it takes 10-15 seconds, it's cooled off now. And there's the piece I cut off. And here's the longer piece. All right. So by cauterizing or sealing this, it's not going to fray or get all frazzled on you where it would split, since this is a woven fabric, right? So like this, it's going to last for years and years. Now if you cut it with scissors or with a box cutter or with a knife, you're going to have that issue with it fraying. So you need to cauterize it using the method I just told you about. All right, so that's a great example of how to cut the lengths or a line in your weed fabric. And now it's cauterized or it's sealed, so it isn't going to fray or frazzle. All right. So now, how do you cut the holes that you're going to use to put the transplant through in your weed fabric? Well, that's where I developed a pretty cool little tool. First thing you want to do is you want to take off the little tip. And this does have a little screw that goes in to fasten it down. I've already removed it. All right, let me put the MagTorch down. Then you want to get yourself a can, bigger than like a Campbell soup can or a typical, 12-ounce can. This is a little larger, it's about 2.5 inches by diameter. If I remember correctly, it was a pineapple can. And on one side, you want to just use a can opener and cut it open, all right? And on the other side, I took a drill and I drilled a hole. And then I took a spike and I pounded it through. And the spike was just big enough for what I was looking for, which was to just barely fit over the can. Okay, so you want a pretty tight fit there, and that's what I got. All right. The next step is you want to go to an auto parts store or a big box store. I'll try to put a link down below. And you want to get a hose clamp. So as you take a screw and you tighten this up, it'll either loosen up or tighten up, all right? So you want to put this on first, step number 1. Step number 2, you want to get a washer that is just about the right size for your torch. So you may need to get the torch and then go out and get the other parts. I actually walked in with the torch to a big box store and they hooked me up. So you've got the hose clamp that fits snugly, a washer, and again, a pretty large washer. Then you put the can on. All right. Then you grab another washer, same size washer, let that drop to the bottom, and another hose clamp, little tiny hose clamp. Then you want to put the tip back on. And what you want to do now is you want to push the can down. You should tighten this hose clamp here. I'm not going to do it right now, but you should tighten this hose clamp here. Push that washer down. Push the can down. I'm going to stand up here. And you want to tighten this top. Hose clamp. Okay. Doesn't have to be super tight, just snug. All right. So now I've got the MagTorch and I've got the can on the end pretty secure. It's not going to go either way. It wiggles a little bit, no problem with that at all. So let's turn this on real quick. All right, we've got fire. And turn it off. So now let's show you an example of how to cut some holes in some weed cloth. All right, so I got a sample piece of weed cloth out. I'm going to turn on the propane torch. It's a little windy today too. I'm going to hit the igniter. Now I'm going to wait for the can to get heated up a little bit. And it'll get hot, so be careful at home. Don't burn yourself. And you don't always want to turn it up on super high. If you turn it up too high, sometimes the torch will burn itself out. So it's on, it's going. Now you just press it down. Hold it there for a second. Lift it up. There's your hole. Press it down. Lift it up. There's your hole. If you need it a little bigger, just put it next to it. All right. So there's a little larger hole. Now what's happened is this area around here has been cauterized. So it's not going to fray or tear or rip. All right, so and this comes in a roll. and you just roll it out. To cut the lengths, I'd put a piece of wood there. And for instance, a piece of wood there. And then I would just use the MagTorch to cut my length. And then to cut the holes in, again, I would just push it out. I would use these green lines as guides. It's a foot in on each side. So this is 1 foot, this is 2 foot, this is 3 foot, but it's a foot in from each edge. And the weed cloth is 3 feet wide. So you could come out with some spray paint. You could eye it. You could put a tape measure out. I don't do that much anymore that I worry about it, but you could actually triple this up. And you could create a, take a piece of wood and kind of make a stencil where you've cut holes in the wood and you just move the piece of wood down and you cut holes. So you could actually triple this up if you wanted to. I'm just doing it one layer at a time and I'm kind of eyeing it out where I put one hole here, that zigzag over one hole here as I go down. The last thing is how to put this in the ground to keep it there. So let me show you a row bag and some garden stakes. So you're almost there. You got your weed fabric cut to the right length for your garden. Your weed fabric has holes in it so you can put the transplants through in your garden. You're going to need a way to secure the weed fabric to the ground. You don't want a corner where you have a plant coming through to have the weed fabric blowing around, damaging your plant possibly. So one thing you could use, and it's very easy, see if I get a good picture of this, is just your typical garden stake. All right, nothing special. And I've got a link down below to some stakes or some spikes that you could use. Another thing you could use is a row bag. And I talk about this in the silage tarp episode, that this is a UV protected material. It's got a handle on one end, opening on the other where you put in pea gravel in our case. And then we use a twist tie to tie it up. I've got about a 30-foot length behind me of weed fabric where I'm going to be putting peppers. And I used about 10 of the gardening spikes or gardening stakes. So make sure you do that. You don't want your fabric blown all over the place, creating a problem. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode on weed fabric. I know it makes my life so much easier and me so much more effective when I'm working in the garden. If you're new to the channel and you want to learn all about growing herbs and vegetables and all kinds of cool garden stuff, then start today by hitting the subscribe button. And if you hit the subscribe button and decide you don't want to stay subscribed, hit it again and you can unsubscribe. And after you hit that subscribe button, a little bell's going to pop up. And if you click on that bell, it'll notify you whenever we release a new episode. And again, you can always click on that bell again and you won't be notified. But you want to click on the bell to be notified so you don't miss anything, because you never know where I'm going to show up next. Due to popular demand, here's the pepper.